everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here today again in my formal dining room that's now my home office. And we are so excited for today's speaker. My name is Jade Turan, and I am the marketing chair of the NAIOP Utah board here in Utah, in Salt Lake City. And my day job is I work for FFKR Architects, also here in Salt Lake City. And we are joined today by Annie Rinker of Hines. Annie, how are you?
I'm good, really excited to be part of this webinar, and Hines is really excited to open our co-working platform in Salt Lake City.
Great, great. Well, we are so excited to have you here in Utah as well. Let's dive right into it. Can you give us an overview of the landscape of flexible offerings by institutional owners? Let's start that off.
Yeah, of course. I think overall, a lot of landlords would probably say that they were slow to react to the flexible office or the co-working movement. And I'll take a quick pause here to explain my vision or view of what co-working is. I think that a lot of people see co-working as this uber dense product that incorporates amenity space and community, and that is part of it. But I think that co-working falls within the spectrum of flexibility, with co-working on one side and then all sorts of different suite products and some other speculative suites, et cetera, that landlords are working on the other. I'll sort of jump back and forth between the concept of flexibility and co-working as we're talking, but I just want to sort of lay the landscape of what I think this industry is headed, where I think it's headed. So I think a lot of landlords are cautious about the business model, and perhaps rightfully so. I think that especially in this COVID environment, we've seen some of the downside that can be attributed to the lease arbitrage model that many of the operators have used. But I think there was a major wake-up moment as landlords realized that the enterprise users, which really were the bread and butter of what makes up their leasing strategy, they started to leverage co-working operators as part of their broader portfolio strategy. So as a result of this, and in some instances, even prior to that happening, a number of landlords started to follow the industry really closely and opted to participate. And that participation is generally seen as happening in one of three ways. One of it can be through an investment. One way can be through a partnership model. And then others have opted to bring operations in-house. So what this looks like in the real world, companies like Blackstone doing an investment in the Office Group in the UK, Brookfield put a major investment in a company called Convene here in the United States. And then other owner groups are opting for the partnership model. So Rubenstein Partners recently did a partnership with Mindspace in Philadelphia, and NREA did a partnership with Car Workplaces in Los Angeles. And then the third category is this concept of a sub-brand. And so Tishman Speyer is a great example. They have a product called Studio. British Land has a product called Story. And the Brain Embassy is a concept from a firm called Adgar Investments out of Poland. So there's really been a lot of landlords thinking about this and applying different strategies as they see fit. So at Hines, we kind of opted for a hybrid of the partnership and the sub-brand. So we've created a product called The Square as our co-working platform, but we also recognize that the operations of these co-working spaces can be pretty involved and can require a lot of capital, require a lot of time. And so we decided to bring in an operating partner to actually run the operations of the space. So in Salt Lake, we've partnered with a national brand, a company called Industrious, to operate our location, which we've now branded as The Square with Industrious. And one of the beautiful things about Industrious is they're actually not new to Salt Lake. They have a location currently on Broadway. And so the location that we're launching in Salt Lake is at the Kearns building, which has been a long-term hold for Hines, and is a really awesome project. It's right in the heart of downtown. It's got some really cool, funky old vibes that we've been able to leverage as we've built out the co-working platform and created a really, really cool product that has aligned the asset strategy of the building, aligned the leasing strategy of the building, but we're bringing in Industrious that is, a top-notch operator across the U.S. To operate the space for us.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. So that brings me to the question, what is the why for flexible offerings? Why are people doing this? Why do they need to adapt? Why is it important?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I was actually recently on a webinar where somebody suggested that landlords should try to stay in their lanes, do what they do best, and stick to buying buildings. And I think that historically, landlords have been extremely successful, especially over the last 10 years, in doing just that. But right now, where we are, and Hines, we consider ourselves to be, one of the best property managers and one of the best asset managers in the business. And I think that Class A landlords and property managers, they can't function just as building buyers anymore, building managers anymore. I think that fundamentally how we work has seen a really seismic shift over the last 2 decades. And I think that we're even seeing that more so now in this COVID environment. I think that what COVID has done is really emphasize, or I guess shrunk the time frame of things that are happening and the technology that's impacting how we work and do business every day. But even without COVID aside, I think that a lot of the changes in the office environment have been spurred by new technologies and innovations and the tools that we use, but also the technology has sort of shifted other aspects of what we're looking at. So, for example, what the modern worker looks like today is fundamentally different. The type of work that we're doing today is much different than it was over past decades. And even the companies themselves and how long they stay in business and what their exit strategies look like, all of that is fundamentally different. And a lot of that has been spurred by technology. And so, I'm considered an quote unquote elder millennial, and I just barely slid in there. But the generation after me, they're considered digital natives. So they're born with access to integrated technology. They believe that information and services should be easily accessible and that they should be transparent. And over the next 10 years, 1.6 billion members of that generation are going to enter the labor force, and that generation, along with the millennials that are currently in the working force, will continue to take over leadership roles. They'll continue to shift the expectations of our end users. They'll continue to have decision-making power over what type of offices we are working out of, where those offices are located, how we're interacting with the offices. And so that's a major shift that we can't ignore from a landlord standpoint. And then I think too, technology has allowed us to shift our focus from more clerical based work to work that is really, I think, more creative, a little bit more conceptual, and requires collaboration. One of my favorite surveys that I've read recently, McKinsey released a survey that had a pretty bold statement. It says that as it stands today, 50% of white collar jobs can be replaced with existing technology in the market. So if we think about that, that can have a major impact on what we're doing and how we're doing it, and thus how we're interacting with our office space. So this means that workers of the future will be heavily focused on EQ versus IQ, which is how we traditionally hired, and that the workplace needs to offer flexibility around that activity-based working concept. And I think, I touched a little bit on the company itself being fundamentally different. I think modern companies are not as stable, and not as stable, not necessarily because they're not financially stable, although that does hold true, but I think they also have different exit strategies than companies of the past that, it was, people tried to get on the S&P 500 and stay there for decades. And that's just not something that necessarily exists in today's modern society. And so, there are the concept of the 10-year lease that doesn't necessarily fit into the portfolio strategy of a lot of companies. So I think all of that to say, there's all of these things that we need to look at from a historical standpoint and from a research standpoint that truly is shifting the next decade of office space. And I think that we started to see that some of that over the previous decade, and that's only going to continue as we move forward, and a lot of these changes are starting to happen.
Now, Annie, Hines is a huge company, and for those watching that aren't as familiar, can you describe your company just a little bit and your overall portfolio strategy for flexible office space?
Yeah, of course. So Hines, we are a privately owned real estate development and fiduciary manager. We also have a very strong property management arm. Hines itself, we have over 400 million square feet of office space in 20 plus countries across the globe. And we started looking at flexible office probably about 3+ years ago. And I mentioned our sub-brand, The Square. I think one of the guiding principles for Hines is that our products and services are the highest standard as appropriate for the mission. And we see the square as really embodying like that service element. So, we think that it can be a tool that we can deploy into our projects and assets across the globe. And really, it has to be for the right project at the right time. We recognize that co-working is not right for every capital stack, for every single asset, for every single location. But our goal as a developer and as a manager is to make things as easy and as seamless as possible for the tenants in our portfolio. So we believe that right now that should include providing a co-working solution, and not just co-working, but it should provide that spectrum of flexibility that I mentioned. And so by creating a product like the Square, we thought it was we want it to be a really great fit for enterprise users who currently are included in the Hines portfolio. And I mentioned sort of that enterprise user that's the bread and butter. That's the bread and butter of Hines as well. And so when we start seeing some of these tenants that are already in our portfolio, but they're using other co-working products, we want to be able to keep them within our assets and provide that level of service that Hines is known for, whether it's a 10-year lease or a 3-month temporary requirement. So we've done a lot of work into the design of the space and the products that we offer. We also, one of the interesting things about the Square is that we're looking at it as R&D for Hines. So I'm a director in the Office of Innovation for Hines, which was a division that was started 3+ years ago when Hines realized that there's all these things that are happening in real estate right now, and that they need to be on the forefront of it. And if not on the forefront of actually delivering it, on the forefront of recognizing that these are trends and evaluating what's working, what's not working, what we should deploy in our projects and what we shouldn't. So at the Square, we have the ability to deploy innovations that we normally couldn't do in the rest of our portfolio. So this includes things like sensors. So in one of our projects, our co-working projects, we have over 100 sensors tracking everything from air quality to movement, to everything else that you might want to track in the space. In Salt Lake, our building is working on registration for WELL Platinum certification, which was something that we started working on in 2019, and obviously in the COVID environment, and once we're returning to the office, that's going to be a really big thing that we think will benefit our end users. Modular walls, tenant experience tools, these are really hot ticket items right now in real estate, and we have the opportunity to use the Square as a playground to benefit the co-working end user, but then also figure out how these tools might be impactful for the rest of our portfolio, which I think is really important. So, we have to approach each project differently. We have to recognize that the structure will be different in each of the different projects. And again, it's not best for everything. We don't want to put a co-working product where it doesn't work. And this could be due to the location, but due to the amenities already in the building, the overall asset strategy, the partners we have on the project. But we felt in Salt Lake City, the building that we have there, like I said, is a really great asset. We were already working on an amenity strategy for the building that aligned perfectly with the timing of us adding in the co-working structure. And it really just made sense for us to have this product in Salt Lake. And we love the Salt Lake market. We think that what's going on there from companies moving there, from some of the technology companies that are coming, the entrepreneurship that's happening there, things like, even NAIOP being so actively involved in Salt Lake is it's good reason for us to put this service product at the forefront of the market for anybody out there that could benefit from it.
Well, I'm going to put in a plug to our executive director, Lindsay, who just runs the show so well. And we have a great board here in Utah. So that was very nice. Thank you for that compliment. And
Yeah.
I know I'm embarrassing Lindsay right now, but she's too modest for her own good, but she's really great. And I know a lot of our members think the same way. So here's one more question, COVID related question. How is your strategy shifting based on expected changes in your customer demand post COVID-19?
Yeah, so I think Post-COVID, so we sort of look at the near term and the long term. So near term, we really have to think about how we're laying out these spaces, how people are going to interact in the space, how can we provide a flexible product that will benefit people while continuing to maintain the health and wellness of our members. And that's something that's important not just for our co-working product, but Hines has done a ton of research and a ton of man hours into putting together back to office plans and a health and wellness strategy around the return to office for our traditional tenants. And so that's something that's just trickling down into the co-working as well. And I also have to put a plug in for Industrious because they've done a lot of research as well. So when you take a company like Hines and you partner it with a company like Industrious, when we look to return to the office, it's creating a place that is really set and ready to have people return to our buildings and then also return to our co-working space. So a lot of what we've done includes a reconfiguration of our space, increased cleaning throughout the floor. We've had to change some of our operational standards. So, things like removing chairs in conference rooms or even shutting down conference rooms where appropriate. We've got, really good programming at the square with Industrious, and so that includes snacks, breakfast daily, snacks in the afternoons. That's all included for our members, free of charge, and happy hours weekly. So that's had to fundamentally change. We don't want to have bagels that everybody can touch, and so we've had to really think around how do we provide that level of hospitality and that service that we're trying to provide, but maintain a healthy working environment for all of the members. So we've had to make a lot of adjustments there, but I think that fundamentally co-working is here to stay, and that goes to a lot of the demographics that I just mentioned, some of the research that we've done, and the reason why Hines got into this in the first place. I think what we're going to see in the short term, or even sort of the midterm, as people are returning to the office, but there might not be a vaccine, the demand for office, people are going to want more flexibility. And so, we were actually working with an enterprise user right now that's looking for 50 seats in the area, and they have larger requirements than they've ever had from a per person standpoint. So, they're looking between 100 and 150 square feet per person, which those are numbers that, you saw back in like 2005, 2002, those are numbers from a long time ago. But what we've sort of talked through with them is the ability to take co-working and flexible office and think about it as, okay, so right now I have 150 square feet per person, but maybe in 2 months I'm going to feel more comfortable with fewer. And so if we start with 50 people and 40 offices, maybe in 2 months that will drop down to 35 offices or 30 offices. And then, eventually once there's a vaccine, we'll get down to something that's closer to 20 offices, which is probably the standard where we were pre-COVID. And so I think that it just offers a lot of flexibility for the end user, for the brokerage community in Salt Lake as well. You can really start to think about how can we, maybe through the de-densification that our clients are looking to achieve, how can we sort of incorporate co-working into that? But I think that that's sort of the short term and the near term, and in the long term, again, we're really bullish on this as a product that needs to be incorporated into our projects into the future.
I see. Annie, there, I'm sure, are a lot of landlords in our audience right now. What framework would you give them to think about, the build or the buy or the partner decision when it comes to adding, service flex options to a portfolio?
Yeah. I think you have to be really careful, and you have to carefully consider all of your options. So I mentioned sort of the three: the investment, the partnership, and the in-house operations. To build or to buy means you're entering into an industry that is heavily focused on operations, heavily focused on service, heavily focused on hospitality. And I cannot overemphasize that enough. I think that there are landlords out there that have just assume that they can incorporate that into property management and call it a day, or that, how difficult can it really be? I can tell you it's very difficult. I've been in this industry for over 13 years now. And it requires a lot of overhead to properly manage, market, and sell these spaces. It can be really extensive, especially within the first year or two, to get the operations up and running. And so the overhead to have this, like if your goal is to have co-working in 1 or 2 locations, a self-performance model probably isn't a good fit for you. I think that a partnership model would be a much better option for you at that time. Hines spent a long time with a lot of smart people in the room thinking about how to move forward and ultimately opted for a hybrid model because you really have to consider your whole portfolio. You have to look at the individual assets. You have to look at the mix of tenants in the building. And again, I talked about this a little bit, but like the amenity program that's already there, where is the building located? What's the partner capital stack of each asset? We also tend to believe that projects shouldn't really have more than 20% of their building assigned to amenity and flexible space. So that should go into your thought process as well. But if you do opt to build, there can be really great alignment between property management, leasing, and asset management, or even the strategy that we deployed, which is sort of this hybrid model. We've made sure that that the square with Industrious is not pilfering from other opportunities in the building, but rather we're aligning that asset strategy and the leasing strategy. And in our buildings, when the leasing team brings tenants in to tour for maybe 2 or 3 floors or 1 floor, whatever the mix is, we're making sure that they're also touring through the co-working floor, and they're including that as this potential to have this concept of ebb and flow within their space. So if the tenant was thinking that maybe they'll add an additional 5,000 square feet, maybe they don't need that additional flex 5,000 square feet. They could just have some space within the co-working floor, and it just gives them optionality for them to consider. And so we've worked really hard to have that alignment, and I think that that's really important regardless of what decision you make. The alignment is really, really key, and you have to pick an operating partner that you're confident can help, that will give you that alignment and that you're comfortable in that relationship. But I think regardless of what you do, you can't ignore that flexibility is an important part of real estate into the future. And again, from the historics and the research that is out there and that we've done, and there's a lot of smart people that have done that research, and that you can listen to their podcasts or read their articles. But I think it's here to stay, and that landlords really need to get on board and understand how it will impact and how they could potentially incorporate it into their portfolio.
I see. Well, Annie, I think that is all of the questions I had planned. Is there anything you would like to add in closing?
No, like I said, Hines has always loved Salt Lake. We are super excited about this project. We're opening June 15th. Obviously, in the era of COVID, we will have to really think about how we launch the product out to the market, how we introduce the product to brokers. But we already have tenants who are moving in June, and so we are excited to bring it. I'm personally excited to get out of the heat when I can leave Houston, Texas, and come up to Salt Lake City. I love the area. I think it's one of the most beautiful parts of the country. So we're just really, really excited to be part of, or I guess I'm excited to be part of the community, and Hines is already fully ingrained, and we're excited to launch this product.
Great. That sounds great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again. If you have any questions, we will have some contact information on the next slide. If you have a topic of discussion you would like to see in our next video, feel free to email myself or Lindsay. Thank you so much everyone for joining us.
Thank you all.